Okay, it's about three after. We'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. My name is Bart Purcell. I am the CEO here at Unizin, and I'd like to welcome you to our second installment of our 2026 webinar series, Data-Informed Advising, Building an Integrated Dashboard with the Unizin Data Platform. So before I hand it over to Scott and David, for those that might not be familiar with Unizin, I just want to do a very quick fly through of who we are and what we do. So we are a 501c3 nonprofit consortium made up of 16 members. Unison began in 2014, and the people around the table at the time when Unison was coming together were really wrestling with two questions that were specific to ed tech. The first is how do we create a consortium or some entity to reduce the duplication of effort that is likely to happen across all our institutions around education technology? And then second, knowing that we'll all be doing some different kind of local projects, some local innovation, how do we take those innovative projects that really work and scale them out to the rest of the membership? So from those two questions materialized the Unison value streams. The first is that we have advantageous contracts with 13, soon to be 14 ed tech solution providers. So those contracts often provide one or both of really good pricing. We represent almost 900,000 students now, so we try and use that to the best of our ability to negotiate good price points. But then we also work with the provider partners to send data back to our members through the Unison Data Platform. So that way we get access to all that data when our students are traversing those different digital learning tools. And then the Unison Data Platform, which I'm sure we'll hear a little bit more about later during the session, that's data infrastructure that brings together data from a student information system, a learning management system, and a growing collection of ed tech tools. We also offer our members something we call Engage. This is an inclusive access content program. So that allows students at our member institutions that use Engage to get access to digital courseware and digital textbooks on or before the first day of class at negotiated price points with about 26 different publishers. And finally, and what I think is probably the most important piece to all of this are our teaching and learning communities. That's the glue that I think brings all of the other three value streams together. So we have 7 communities of practice. They include communities around topics like accessibility, application development, learning analytics, faculty development, and so on. So that's where a lot of our members share ideas and where a lot of R&D and demonstrations take place that eventually work their way up into some of that scaled innovation that we work to try and help take things that happen locally and move those out to other members across the consortium. So before I hand it to David and Scott, just a little information on why we selected student success with a focus on advising as our thematic area this year. Back in 2024, we did an inventory across Unison and tried to understand what are people building in terms of applications or dashboards or reports that use the Unison Data Platform, and more specifically, who are you trying to provide data to? There's a lot of different people that could be on the other end of that. And at the time, we found that about 35% of the dashboards and projects were aimed at advisors. About 30 to 33% were directed at faculty. And then there was a pretty big drop off, and you started to get to a couple student projects, a couple administrator facing projects, and so on. So that was late 2024. We just did this again in late 2025, and we found about 4 more projects in the advising space, including the project that we're going to hear about today. So it seems to be a growing use of data. I think it's a great use of Unison Data Platform data. So I'm really excited to hear more from David and Scott about what they're doing with the Missouri system. So with that, I will stop my share and turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Bart. I think Scott's going to get our slideshow up, but yeah, thank you all for coming out and taking time out of your day to kind of learn what we were doing. We're really excited about what we were able to produce using the Unison Data Platform. As Bart mentioned, I do love the fact that, and I'll get to this on a later slide, that a lot of the work we had to do on the data wrangling side is basically already done in the Unison Data Platform, right? So all the consortium, all that collaboration, right? They already know like certain data marts to produce. They're produced. We can just leverage them. And that makes our time to creation for these kind of things much, much faster and easier, which is great, right? Because then we can get insights into the people who need the insights. So quick facts from our department. We work for Mizzou Online. So we handle online programs, design services, kind of the technology support. And where Scott and I work is we're in the solutions and analytics group. So we help try to provide analytics and different kinds of compute solutions for anybody using our technologies, right? So our Canvas learning management system, we do with Slate for student recruitment and whatnot. Okay, so we'll start with the problem that was kind of provided to us, and this is kind of what led the task of looking at how we can use Unizin or the Unizin Data Platform to solve it. So we had the registrar and a vice provost come to us and be like, "Hey, we've got this problem, right? Like the legacy tool that we're using for advising is kind of slow and cumbersome, right? Advisors are having to go in and search one at a time for each of their students." And for our athletics department, it was particularly troubling because, coaches want to see like weekly reports on these students and how they're doing. And that's just creating a ton of work, extra work, manual work. And so we're like, well, we have all this data in Canvas, right? We can literally create a Power BI dashboard for you all that you could use to just go in, look at the data in aggregate, and then you have it. They also said, well, we're also having to do like activity reports from the instructor. They have to go and fill out this Google form. So we're like, well, why? I mean, if they use Canvas for their course, right, which a lot of them do for online, either fully online or hybrid, we can show you activity that's occurring in Canvas. So we don't even have to bother the instructor for those kind of courses. So they were super excited about that as well. So what we ended up doing was leveraging the Unizin Data Platform to create a Power BI dashboard that we were able to create, the aggregations they needed for their advising groups. We could filter it down. So Scott will show this later in the demo, but you can filter it down to those whose score is under 70, right? So you have those students who maybe you needed some immediate intervention or action on. And then we also exposed a bunch of metrics about what's happening in the course in terms of assignment submissions or sessions or anything like that. So again, we'll get to that in the demo. But before we get to the demo, maybe we'll talk about how we got there and how we built it from the data wrangling side. Yes, and then Scott will talk about the dashboard rollout and the demo, and then we'll talk about what we have learned. So I'll start with the data wrangling aspect. And as I alluded to earlier, like Unizin provides 80%, right, of everything that we used for this. And it was just out of box, ready to use. So if you're unfamiliar with the platform, so Unizin takes and handles our ingest from Canvas. So Canvas has a nightly data feed for Canvas Data 2. They take that data, put it in a warehouse, right? They also take the live event data, click level data that's happening in Canvas, that caliper stream. They handle that ingestion, put it in a data warehouse. They also will take a stream from our SIS system, put it in a warehouse, and then they normalize all this data together, right? So we can have the benefit of SIS defined type data, Canvas learning data, and clickstream data, right? Just all there available that we can then use and join from. They also will take this data and put it into marts. I have a little bit more to say on this slide, but they put it in the marts. I'm really jazzed about this stuff. Like this is what excites me because this saves a ton of work because I list some of the specific marts for those of you who are interested, who are currently Unizin members, right? We take these marts and directly translate them to value to the advisors in the dashboard. We'll show you a little bit. The newest, I don't know if it's the newest Mart, but it's the one that I think is completely brilliant is the daily course grade record. So now it's not just they're capturing current state data, but they're also recording a snapshot each day of the student's grade. And this is a whole level of insights that are being unlocked. We actually leverage this, and I'm hoping this will become super valuable for the advisors because now they can see trends, not just a snapshot that the student has a score of a 72, but they can see, well, did that 72 come up from a 58? Did it come down from a 95? Is it relatively steady, right? Now we can introduce some of that trend level data. So I think that's a brilliant Mart. And we didn't have to do anything. It just appeared one day and it was like, here, use this. And we're like, sure, we will. So that's all the stuff. I know that kind of maybe sounds like a sales pitch for those of you who aren't members, but it is. It's great. We love that part. So our wrangling tasks are very easy. We just basically have to come up with the advisor advisee mappings. And then we also abstracted that data model we use for Power BI so that we could use one report for any advising group that wanted to come. So we actually have four different advising groups. They all use the same dashboard. Scott will get into the row level security that we did that make it all work, but it makes it very easy to scale out to whoever needs to use this dashboard um, at Mizzou. And I think with that, I will pass it over to Scott to talk more about this dashboard.
All right, thanks, David. Yeah, so my job at Mizzou Online is data analyst. So I mainly work on the final piece of this chain, which is the visualization piece. And so once all that data is wrangled and put together, and we have those tables set out the way we need to set them out, it's very easy from a data management perspective. And in order to meet the initial goal of this project, which was pretty simple, for the advisors aspect, from the advisors' perspective, is just they need a report. But as David mentioned, there's a lot more data there and a richness to that data that we can provide. So we started out, we put it all in Power BI and in a presentable form that meets just the basic business purpose, which is a report. It needs to be ultimately just to save advisors some time, but it needs to facilitate what they need to do with it. So it needs to be exportable in a spreadsheet. There's a few filters associated with it, some that we added, some that were requested, and it needs to be secure. So um, part of the row level security part, which I'll get to in a moment, and a little bit of the training that went into it. The only other thing was because we're combining grade data with event level data. The timing of those pieces comes in at a little bit different data flow. So there's a little bit of a data freshness difference between the event data and the grade data, which is grade data is a little bit lagging from the event data. But we'll show you how we presented that in the table in the demo. So as soon as I explain a little bit of this, we'll get into the demo. Um, from there, it was just a matter of setting up the tables, and when we have the advisors matching with the students, and the way Power BI works with row level security, you can assign security roles. That's just a set of rules that we can create to apply to each advisor or advisor group, and it filters the data accordingly. And so if we have a table of advisors and we have identifying information about them, like their email and their single sign-on ID, when they log into Power BI, it recognizes who it is, and then from that table where the advisors are kept, it filters the student table, or in some cases, depending on the advising group, it can show you all of the students associated with the advising group that is associated with the advisor. So that's how we keep the data secure, but that's also how we maintain it in a way that is expandable and can grow and built to scale. If we want to add, we started with Mizzou Athletics. We set up a unique role for them. They want to view each advisor individually. So when one advisor logs in, they only see their students. But like I said, we also have some other roles that can view all of the students within that advising group. And when we want to add another advising group, which we've had a few other come to us and say, hey, that sounds great. That would save us a bunch of time too. Can you add us? It's as simple as adding that advising group to the tables and basically copying out the rules to apply them to a different advising group. And so that's row level security. It's just a matter of filtering the data and keeping things secure and only visible to who needs to see it. And so I'll explain a little bit of that as I go through the demonstration now. So this is all fake data that David put together for this presentation, but all of the basic pieces are there. And you can see that we've got just a basic setup here. If you're an advisor and you log into this through that row level security process, it'll recognize who you are, and it'll recognize what advising group you belong to. So if an advisor, I love this, David, nice name. If an advisor logs in and they belong to a certain advising org, it'll only show them students associated with that advisor. Um, so we have a few other levels of detail for filtering. And then, as David mentioned, there's a latest score below 70. So if they wanted to quickly just check on any students who maybe needed some help at this point, getting their grade up, they could filter down to that pretty quickly. And then if they need to export that data, there's an option here just to export to a spreadsheet. And again, this was the main focus of the project, is this page right here. This is the one that gets the most use. It's just a table. It's nothing fancy in terms of visualization. Um, but all the information here is information, again, that they would have had to go and look up each student individually in each class. And so we have each student has the classes that they're taking. It has, as David mentioned, that grades capture. So if a new grade is posted, it'll update the course grade and it'll export out the next time the dashboard refreshes. And so this is the latest captured course score. In other words, that's unique for each student. And so it has an associated date with that course score. So for this student, well, let's go to the second one, the 35.9. This student's grade was updated as of February 19th in this fake data. But we also have Canvas course activity dates. And so we can keep track of when the last time the student had an activity in that course. And that is another date dimension that we add to this table. And that, again, is on a row by row level, each student. But we also have up here at the top, same data point, entire data set. So this is essentially just when the last time the data was updated. And this is kind of like the gateway piece of data for them. So this was the main purpose, but we also wanted to get them into all of the other pieces of data that we can provide to dig a little bit of deeper into some of that event data that can come in on a more frequent basis. And so that's the page 2 of this. And you notice we call it experimental. This was not something they specifically asked for, but something that we wanted to show that we could provide. And this data, again, shows a week by week breakdown of their course score. So let me find a good one here. Brandon. Let me try that again. Okay, here we are. So Brandon here has a couple of different courses, and it'll show the course grade. Basically, it's a carryover from that first page, but for this sake, it's not populating, but in the working dashboard, it does. But then it also gives a week by week progression. So if you're in week 9, it'll show your weekly score all the way up to that week of the semester. And you can see on the right the associated assignments submitted. We have down to the assignment submissions level data, and then navigation time and the number of sessions they've been in that course. And so you can imagine a scenario where a student maybe in week 1 they have a 95, and then as it progresses throughout the semester, maybe it's dipping down to an 85 and maybe down to an 80 and then a 70. And then you can see, okay, maybe they're turning in fewer and fewer assignments, or they're missing weeks altogether, or maybe you can see that they are spending less time in the course, and you can see a correlation to that week by week progression. And so this is something that we can provide, and that if an advisor sees something that correlates to, their grade dipping in the class, they're spending less and less time, maybe they can use it as an early indicator to reach out to the student. Other things that we could do, areas of growth, we could create automatic reports. Right now, they go in and access it as frequently as the reporting needs, but we could create flags or indicators or alerts that send to the advisor, and they can dig deeper and provide more information to them. And that's one of the areas we're looking at to provide a little bit more growth with the richness of the data that we now have access to. So that's some of the area for improvement. David, do you want to take it back over for the feedback you've heard from these groups?
Sure, yeah. So we got back, we heard back. So we ran with athletics, like Scott mentioned in the fall, and just got a glowing email back from their kind of lead advisor who was just like, You can't thank us enough. Like it's saved again to the time saved alone was just huge. And so, we felt pretty good. We felt pretty good about that. And that also led to, as Scott mentioned, some other advising groups saying, like, hey, we want this too. So we've been doing them, pilot them this spring, and they've been using it well, and they've got additional fields that they need for their stuff. So some of these are just quick wins. Like one of them had like, hey, can you put a student email address so that we can email the student? Well, sure, yeah, that seems like a very natural thing. I know locate a student in trouble. I don't want to have to go look up what the student email is. I just want to be able to have it right there in the dashboard. That's easy. Other things had good ideas like, hey, can you put in their academic standing? Well, yes, we could, but this is a little more complex to do, right? This isn't actually in our UDP instance. We'd have to source from something else. We also want to be strategic. And again, we want to make this kind of a one size fits all solution, right? We don't want to have 20 different dashboards and maintain them for 20 different advising groups. So we think this is a great suggestion. We think that it might have some predictive capabilities in there, but we got to work out like, well, can every advisor see this information about their students? This is like a protected data field from the registrar. And if it is, it's okay to do or put in like how do we roll this out in a way so we're not just continually bolting on things. Again, it's the balancing act between product complexity and the needs of the audience, right? And every one of us who produce data projects or applications or whatever know like you can very quickly like duct tape and coat hanger a bunch of stuff on there, but then it becomes really difficult to maintain. But these are still great ideas, and we love the fact that they're engaging on us because they're actually thinking about ways we can improve it in the future. And then, like Scott mentioned, the last improvement area is how do we get more people looking at page two of the dashboard? Meaning, right now, your current needs and workflows maybe only need the current grade, but we really think there's a lot of cool analytics that are on the second page that actually might tell a better story about their individual students. So, how do we get people engaged on that page as well and doing that? And so, that's what we kind of think the improvement could be as we reach out and talk to them at the end of the semester about how their pilot went. One of our questions is, hey, how was the experimental data? Did that help at all? And hopefully the response is not always, well, I didn't look at it. Which in that case, it would be, well, when you do it in the fall, why don't you look at it? Because we're excited about this. And this is what potentially we could see to do it. We did have one advisor who also is interested in doing some research on this. So we said, well, this is great. You can just take a snapshot of this data for your advising. Once you get, IRB approval and everything, the data is here that you can then use for your research for your doctoral program or whatever. So that was another unanticipated benefit, right? By just getting data into the hands of the people. And ultimately, as we talked about, this is about advisors, but we also want to expose this data to faculty direct, right? So faculty can also have these kind of analytics available beyond what Canvas is already providing in their new analytics tool. What can we do to supplement that tool with additional insights? So there's kind of our long-term strategy, right? Is to get this advisors and they have a need, so they're using the tool, get more additional input to hopefully help when we roll this out in the future, maybe as a Canvas app or something that faculty could directly use for their course to see the trends of their student. So that's sort of in a nutshell what we've done and what we produced. That actually concludes our official formal presentation. But we're happy to stick around and answer any questions if anybody has them.
Thanks, David and Scott. I see a question from Matt in chat here that's really around, I think, sort of faculty sensitivity and policy. So can you speak a little bit to how faculty maybe kind of were involved in the thinking behind this, but then also the policy. And I always find this interesting coming from Penn State, working on projects like this, but then working with a lot of people across the consortium. Policies seem to differ wildly in terms of what advisors can and can't see across the consortium. So I'm curious if you can speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And for our thing, we had registrar approval to do it. So that sort of took care of the navigating the waters. We had the registrar on our side. as well as a vice provost who basically said, make this happen. So we didn't have to individually do this. We did run into that. We tried to do some student analytics a few years ago. And to your point, Matthew, like it was, I mean, tomatoes and everything were being thrown at us. Like when we tried to say, "Hey, we got these great analytics for students." Oh, no, you don't, So we do. So we're kind of back into, as you can see, we have a need. Everybody understands and it relies upon student success, especially for our athletes, for our other groups that need additional assistance through advising that sort of have got analytics in the foothold. And that's where I'm saying I'm hoping that we can build on that, right? Because now we'll have additional allies to then say, when we take this to the faculty, they'll be less concerned because, hey, we've got advisors using the same data and everything. But yes, that will vary drastically on your campus, depending on how they feel about privacy and analytics. Great question.
Matt, do you have any follow-up to that, or did that hit on what you were looking for?
Yeah, it's very helpful and interesting, and that might be approach we end up going down that road. We are, of course, in a different era now in terms of how faculty governance bodies are viewed in our state at least, and I know it's true in some other states as well. But that being said, we obviously would still prefer to have as much buy-in as possible from stakeholders, but yeah, and we really didn't get pushback on the activity pieces, which were the other activity pieces you have in the mix as well. It was just when we started talking about pulling directly from the grade book. And I'm wondering if one idea, though, might be that we sort of position it as an alternative to the manually submitted faculty feedback, which we also still have, the typical early alert system, and essentially saying, hey, if you we made this possible so that you can avoid that manual work over there. Thank you all. Appreciate the presentation.
Yeah. Yeah, Matthew, that's a great point because it's basically everyone with the AI era wants more automation and less manual work. And that's a great selling point. And that was a big selling point for this was just, hey, there's just too much manual people cut and pasting data from different sources. We need to just get on board with the fact that we can automate this sending reports.
Other questions, you can put them in chat or just unmute and ask a question. So while people are thinking about questions, I have a lot, but the one that I'm kind of really curious about is we can always do interesting things with data and technology, but it's often the change management of someone's workflow changing that's kind of the hardest thing to start to grow the adoption. So I'm kind of curious, were there existing tools that people were using on campus? It sounded like whatever was in place was very manual. I'm just curious how you helped advisors kind of, and I know you're still doing this, but walk up that adoption curve and sort of enter into a new workflow that might be foreign to some of them.
Yeah, and so we kind of touched on this by it's easier to sell a tool when it makes your life easier. And so and I shouldn't say this is not meant as a direct replacement to the tool. So we always sold it as a supplement. In fact, all analytics that we do, like that's our strategy is this should supplement what you're already doing because the other tool has other great features that you can use and provide additional insights. We're not trying to replace it, right? But we're trying to close the gaps on what that tool doesn't provide. I always say, like, if that tool ends up providing this exact same functionality and it meets exactly your needs, well, maybe we don't need this other thing, right? I don't want to recreate the wheel. Nobody does. But right now, it doesn't. So this is a supplemental tool that provides that information. And you can tell we're also trying to use this for our own, purposes of growing analytics and using more data-informed decisions, not just for the advisors, but for a faculty. And then eventually, right down the road, for our students, because, I feel strongly that our students can benefit from this same information as well. But I get it to what we've already talked about. There's a lot of governance, like red tape and strong feelings on both sides of this issue that we have to navigate. So we have to get there in a measured response unless something super disruptive happens.
other questions or comments for David and Scott? Going once, twice. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. We will package this video up, put it on our YouTube channel. And David or Scott, if you're willing to share the slides, you can shoot those my direction. We'll include those in a follow-up email. And thank you, everyone, for spending some time with us this afternoon. We appreciate it. Be on the lookout for the next webinar, probably in a couple of months. Thanks, everyone. Have a good afternoon.